Hi, friends. How are you? Thanks for being interested in what we're doing in the state of California related to competency-based education. I'm Erin Thomas. I am the Department Chair of Business, and I'm the faculty lead of this initiative at our college. And as you'll learn, it's a multi-year grant. So this is a passion of mine, or I wouldn't be doing it, this competency-based education. And I think as we teach you a little bit about what it is, you'll understand why. And it's very, very relevant to what we've been hearing in other parts of this symposium. I come to education from a business background. So my undergraduate degree was in computer science. That led me to an IT career. As I got a little bored with that, by moving up into a director position at Qualcomm Incorporated down in San Diego, I went back to school to get my MBA. That allowed me to work with customers and do some more sophisticated systems implementation work with international customers. So that was what I did before I retired from my business career. And I've been teaching since 2009. So bringing all of that business experience into the classroom.
Okay, thank you, Erin, very much. Thank you. And welcome again, everyone. My name is Randy Beach. I'm English faculty at Southwestern College. I also did not go directly into teaching after college. I spent quite a few years working in television and newspapers and media. A lot of hands-on work there in an industry where having a degree isn't always something you have to have. Back in that day, and I'm not going to say how long ago that was, but it was not uncommon at all for people to come right into the workforce, bringing the skills with them they had developed in other places, and then applying them into the old-fashioned news industry. So that is related thematically to what we'll be talking about today, of course, with competency-based education. But also today, I'm the curriculum chair at Southwestern College, which is in the California Community College District. We're the very last college on the map down in California. And I also serve as a commissioner for the Accreditation Commission for Junior and Community Colleges, an academic member there. And we'll be talking about accreditation as we go, and there may be questions about that as we go as well. All right, well, that's us, and we're excited to hear from you as we go through. So please, again, use that chat and that Q&A, and let's get rolling. So what is the CBE grant? I believe Erin may have mentioned that we are part of a collaborative of colleges. There are 8 colleges that the Chancellor's office selected to be a part of this grant program. An RFP went out. All the colleges had to collectively determined that they wanted to be involved in this. Thanks, Erin. We collectively determined that we were going to be involved, and that's an important point to emphasize, because this cannot be introducing competency-based education, especially direct assessment, which we'll be talking about in a moment. This cannot be something that 1 or 2 people at your college decide is worthy of pursuit. It has to be an all hands on deck endeavor. As I mentioned, there were 8 colleges selected that have been involved in this work. It includes a $515,000 grant over 4 years. I believe we're in year 3 now. We're kind of bringing up the end of year 3. And this grant has allowed Coastline, we see Coastline here, but many of the colleges to be innovative in terms of the educational programs we're providing. And the services we want to bring to our students, especially our non-traditional students. And this project was supported at all of our colleges by our board of trustees. They had to sign the application as well. And we really look at it as an enrollment management tool, but also it's a tool about serving the kind of student for whom competency-based education makes a lot more sense. And that's not just about scheduling, because of the way competency-based and direct assessment works. It's about their life experience, because competency-based education, like many initiatives nationwide, is really focused on what the learner is bringing to the program from other places where they've learned things. And I know that's not a scientific way to put it, but I think you know what I mean. So we're going to touch on a lot of that as we go through. Erin, if we could please go to the next. So we've talked about the collaborative. You can see the 8 colleges that are involved in the collaborative. You can see we're up and down the map. It really was an opportunity to spread the word of CBE and for different regions, different areas to learn what it means and then to apply to the needs of our students in those regions, right? Shasta College, for example, being a more rural area, may have a program, will have students whose needs need a program that is going to be as flexible as possible, whereas some of the other colleges that are kind of sitting on top of each other may be able to collaborate in other ways and provide different types of services. You'll also notice the diversity of programs. Most of these programs you've noticed are career technical education programs, but we want to emphasize also that these are all associate degree programs, which means the curriculum we've developed must have general education as well. And we'll talk a bit about general education as we go through the different slides. So if you're looking at this slide and you're seeing a program that you have at your college and you're already thinking, hey, this might be a program that we want to engage in, the competency-based education, you may see a college is blazing the trail for you and being that first pancake. And you saw the title of our presentation is The First Pancake. If you've ever had kids and they scream for pancakes on a Sunday morning, you know that first pancake isn't always the most gorgeous one. Doesn't look like the Martha Stewart cover of her magazine. It doesn't look like that YouTube video, but you know what? It still tastes pretty good. So we think of ourselves as the first pancakes, and we are going to hopefully learn as much as we can so that colleges who come behind us can benefit from that experience. And with that, I will throw it over to Erin.
So I'll be talking about what CBE is so that we can all be really clear. And to be clear, we are talking about a specific version of competency-based education, which is called direct assessment. The folks that are attending this conference will really appreciate the fact that we really focus on backwards course design, focused on what competencies a learner needs to master. And so all of our curriculum is around what does the person need to be able to do to demonstrate that they can demonstrate competency of whatever skill set we're talking about. But where we change things is that the time it takes can vary. So we are so used to our 16-week, 8-week, whatever structured way of teaching. We're very used to our seat time. That's the basis for our payment, how we get paid as instructors. It's the basis for students' transcription of credit. So going to a situation where the time will vary, but the actual learning is very fixed is a real challenge for most of us to get our hands around. But that is a key element of a direct assessment competency-based education program. There's a very big focus on doing as terms of learning. So instead of teaching everything in a book and building a course around a text, again, we go back to what are those skills that the student needs to be able to demonstrate, and how do we teach to them, what do we do to teach them how to be successful at that skill? And that involves practice, because we're talking about doing, not just about learning. So we're going beyond measuring of learning and into measuring of capability and actually being able to do things. This also very much goes towards the guide on the side model of instruction, which many of us are already moving towards in other areas of our institutions, rather than a sage on the stage. And I should say that the learners who are attracted to these kinds of systems are probably not the learners that are already in our classrooms, because those learners have already adapted themselves to us. Those learners have already said, okay, I'm going to live in this 16-week semester world where I can only start college 1 or 2 times, maybe 3 times a year. And so that works for them. What CBE is designed to do is to address that huge market of folks for whom our traditional system just is not accessible. So most of these programs are proposing start times multiple times a year. The Coastline proposal includes 9 different times of a year where you could start our 2-year program, our associates program. And how quickly or slowly a person will move through a competency will vary with the skills they bring to the table. So they may be very skilled in one area and therefore able to move through a competency, which equates ultimately to a class. We must transcript coursework as part of our grant. Or they may encounter a competency that's very new to them, and that might need more time than would even be offered in a traditional learning environment to master that skill. They are not penalized if it takes them longer than a traditional 8-week or 16-week course to master a skill. They're allowed to continue to move through the material until they can demonstrate mastery of it. So this is enshrined in Title V, and it's been around for a while. We have others, and we'll show them to you, institutions who are doing direct assessment competency-based education. So this is not a new thing, but it is not done very widely, and you'll learn why as we move through the rest of these slides. It's kind of challenging, and it breaks a lot of our traditional institutional norms as community colleges and teachers in higher education. But if you want to look at the section of Ed Code that's there, you can see how that's listed. And it was, again, Department of Education approved direct assessment competency-based education. It approved competency-based education in the 90s. Direct assessment was added in the 2000s or so. And this is the state regulations that were fairly recently modified to prepare us as community colleges to offer these programs. So it's a really different approach from the seat time idea that if you are a faculty member and you've written a course outline of record, it talks about hours of instruction and hours of times that students spends outside the classroom. And so this credit hour is the basis for how we do things. Whereas we move beyond that in the competency-based education world, specifically in direct assessment, to go beyond the idea of assuming that a learner has learned something because they've sat in a chair for a certain amount of time. So quite different. Most of these programs, but not all of them, are fully online. Most, but not all, are fully asynchronous, or they're asynchronous with a few check-in points. And again, we talk about this flexible calendaring that we see. It's very easy to confuse what competency-based education is. And again, because there are direct assessment versions and non-direct assessment versions, people can get confused. But when we have a student who thrives in an environment where they have a Sunday evening due deadline for assignments, and they know that and they can work with that, then this may not be the right model for them. If we have a learner who has peaks and valleys in their personal and work life, where they might be able to devote a lot of time in a given couple of weeks to learning, then they are really potentially well suited for a CBE approach because they can move through as quickly as their time allows. This is student-directed pacing. So they set the pace. We would recommend to them potentially how long one would expect someone to move through materials, but the learner can move more quickly or more slowly than that with no penalties. It is not credit by exam. Unfortunately, it shares the acronym with credit by exam, but it's really important for me to make sure that everyone understands that there is a body of work a learner will produce as they complete these courses, these competencies. So there's no testing out of a class here. And we've also had to make some intentional decisions about amounts of coursework that would be pre-done coursework that would be allowed to be transcribed onto this competency-based education transcript, as well as credit for prior learning, because we value those things. And at the same time, because someone has taken a class, it doesn't necessarily mean that they've mastered the competency associated with that class. So it's a real challenge to try and balance those things. But the other thing it leads us towards, because again, we start with what we're trying to achieve in terms of the competency and work backwards, really authentic assessments, which I know is of interest to many of the participants here. So authentic assessments, project-based learning, things like that. The idea of a final exam is not really part of the best practices of CBE. So it's very, very different than what we see in today's world. Another thing is that you can go at your own pace. So some people equate this to the Netflix of education. Time that scenario where a learner's home life is quite varied and they might have times where they can really get through a lot of coursework just in a certain time frame. This would be a great model for them. Here are the institutions who have authority from the federal government to offer direct assessment programs and also offer financial aid to students who are enrolling in those programs. So you see primarily nonprofit or not-for-profit institutions with just one or two state-funded institutions. And that's just showing you that again, while this has been done, it's never been done in California in public education. So we are really breaking new ground here. And I just realized that Randy was supposed to talk to this slide.
Quite all right. Now, a few other points to make here, and Erin's absolutely right. This list is very telling. We can see that competency-based or direct assessment instruction is all over the place. This is not new, but it is in many ways new to California, especially California's community college system. And it's important to recognize that direct assessment, competency-based education at a two-year public university, college, two-year college, this is new. This is that first pancake we've talked about because no one is attempting to do what we're doing, and the regulations that govern the work we're doing and guide our work stipulate we must do direct assessment. That's the vision the legislature's the vision the Chancellor's office has for bringing this to students. Many of these are private schools, so therefore they have a lot more money, to be blunt about it. They have more resources that they can easily pivot toward this, making an investment in this kind of instruction. And obviously that can present a challenge for many of our publicly funded schools where your employee budget alone could be 85, 90% of your overall budget. Finding money for innovation can be a challenge. Another thing that comes up when we look at this list, and that word authority is really important there in the title. Every college that offers instruction through direct assessment must receive approval from its accreditor, as well as the United States Department of Education, but for two different reasons. Your accreditor, by giving you a substantive change approval, gives you the green light to begin building your program. You answer a series of questions that focus on the planning process around your direct assessment and competency-based education programs, questions around the curriculum, how it was developed. Very importantly, how do you equate credit hours to competency instruction? This is a really important element for the accreditor to know that the value of what you're providing is equal to that which a student would receive in a traditional credit-based program. And as you read some of the literature around CBE, around this journey from credit hour to competency-based, you'll see a lot. It'll raise a lot of questions for you as to why the credit hour exists in the first place. If you dig into the history, and if we had another hour and a half, we could talk about the history of the credit hour. It is quite interesting to think that so many of our systems, so much of the work we do is based in something that in its beginnings really had very little, if anything, to do with education. So that's an eye-opening, it's an opportunity to really expand your view of what we do. But again, the accrediting commission is going to look at your methodology for how you're making that equation or that equivalence between the credit hour and your competencies and your curriculum. They're going to look at your planning process, your resource allocation process, to make sure that you are making that investment in a way that's going to support students, as well as other questions that are pretty consistent with what your accreditor looks for whenever they do an evaluation. Once you've received that substantive change approval, then you can move on to the United States Department of Education application. And the importance of that application and approval is to be able to offer the federal financial aid. Simply having your accreditor's approval for the substantive change does not automatically give you authority from the Department of Education to offer financial aid for students in your direct assessment programs. That process is one of the reasons Erin and I are together in these Zoom boxes so often, because our two colleges have submitted our applications. We're waiting for feedback. Coastline College, Erin's college, has already received feedback on theirs. We submitted ours earlier this month. We just heard yesterday that Mount San Antonio College has also submitted, so we're excited to have another in our trio of colleges now. but we're now waiting for that iterative process with the department to begin. Aaron, you received quite a list of questions regarding your application, some of which were questions that were clearly answered in the application, but definitely more clarity was required. Did you want to mention something about that?
No, but we feel well prepared to respond to the questions, and we expected this. So we've been told that that is part of the way the Department of Education reviews and approves these applications, is that they do go back and forth. I appreciate the fact that they're really trying to understand what's happening. It's also my understanding that because the application is so lengthy, that they may have divided up the sections and have them be read by different people. So the person who read one section, the information may be provided elsewhere, but it wasn't in their section. So that's why they're asking the question, which is perfectly fine. We're happy to answer the questions.
Right. And it is a process. And that's one the most important thing to know going into that Department of Education application is that it's going to be back and forth. One of our colleagues at CBIN, the Competency-Based Education Network, a woman named Lori Dodge, told us yesterday you can expect at least 3 bites at that apple. They're going to come back to you at least 3 times with more questions, more clarifying inquiries regarding the application you presented in the program you hope to start. So again, this list of colleges, these are good places to go and just poke around their websites, look to see how they explain competency-based education and direct assessment to their students, look at their curriculum in their catalogs, but also this is a reminder of the authority needed to offer direct assessment has many steps, and there are many parts to that. So if you want to jump on to the next, Aaron's going to talk to us about Coastline.
Yes, so what Randy and I thought we would do to help really bring this to life is we're going to spend some time, and I'll try and move through my part fairly quickly, talking about what the program that Coastline is developing and the program that Southwestern is developing, because they're very different, and how they're being developed is coming up to be quite different, and that's something else to be prepared for. So for those of us in California, and I know these initiatives have actually been nationwide, if you've ever worked on a guided pathways sort of initiative, we've learned that just throwing a student into a classroom and giving them a big catalog of classes to choose from, the cafeteria model, does not necessarily lead to student success. And so we have found that if we guide students through a pathway of learning, that they're likely to be more successful. And so what we took as an opportunity with Coastline's program, which is an associate's degree in management, is to say we believe that there is a logical pathway through the curriculum, the series of courses, which again relate to competencies, and the students are going to move through these competencies, each of which equates to a course. So there's your 20 courses in your Associate of Science degree, that there's a logical order to those competencies. And so a student will begin enrollment in our program, and they enroll in the program. They don't enroll in classes, they enroll in the program, and they'll immediately be working in 2 competencies, written communication and financial acumen. So those are our foundational English and math classes. And that's freshman composition, actually. As they complete one of those 2 in a single block, they can move into one of the 2 competencies in the next block and keep moving. So the idea is that if they're awaiting instructor feedback on the submission, they can keep working. They can move through material in their other class, if you will. However, if they complete the other 2 classes in block 2, they cannot move into block 3 until both classes in block 1 are completed. So they can't get too far ahead. And again, this scaffolds. So there will be a fair amount of business writing later in this program, given that this is a management degree. We want to have those foundational written communication skills provided first, so that when the student enters our class, our business class, we're not worrying about and coaching them on their writing. We're focused on the learning. So we very intentionally ordered these classes the way you see them. You also see that this is a multidisciplinary activity. We've got all sorts of disciplines involved so that we are covering our general education pathways. Coastline is uniquely qualified or positioned to take on an initiative like this because we're fairly small and we're very collaborative. And I know that doesn't exist at all institutions, but I'm honored to be at an institution where there is a lot of cross-discipline collaboration, or you wouldn't see that beautiful color palette that I'm showing there, because we had agreement and support from every general education discipline in order to participate in this project. So we were able to successfully identify existing, one or two places we created new general education classes so that we were properly backtracking, crosswalking our competency to a general ed class that met our local degree general education requirements. These kinds of programs in general are uniquely qualified to work with industry. This program that we did, that's a management associative science, is based on industry research. So there's an organization called Organization Systems International. They survey C-level executives to identify what skills exist in those executives. And they have developed something called the Polaris Leadership Model. And so this model is used all sorts of in all sorts of companies, a wide range of industries, to develop employees. And the idea is that there's a certain set of competencies that you need at different levels of the organization, and that you can train people and teach people how to master those competencies. So there are 41 in the master set of people that are chief executive officers, chief operating officers, et cetera. Our degree is to position a learner to become an entry-level manager. And so we narrowed that down to 17 competencies that they will master as they move through our program. So having a third party or outside certification body telling you what skills are needed is a really great place to start, because when you can do that, you have that synergy, you have, and most of us in career education have advisory boards. So you're already getting that industry input, but the industry is telling us exactly what is needed in terms of a skill set for a lot of these things. You'll hear about that in Randy's as well. So the good news is when you have that partnership with industry, we can be much more confident that we are delivering graduates who are career ready immediately from day one. So that's a big value. And we just heard a little bit about that whole topic with Marty in the last session. I will say that one of the biggest challenges that Coastline had, and that just about any community college, publicly funded college is going to have, is figuring out how to add this modality to an operational model that is so geared around the credit hour. So it's impacting all of the areas that you see there, and we needed to consider how the curriculum was going to be developed and delivered to students at the same time that we're building these operational models. So that work happened in parallel, and it's necessary for that work to happen in parallel. So it's a challenge. That said, the college has been open. We've had support from the board of directors, especially from our president, and that's what is allowing us to make the adjustments we need, to the tweaks to our existing model in order to support what we are doing. And one of the ways we've been able to do this is every time we get into a meeting and we're having a difficult conversation about how are we going to do this, we remind ourselves why we're here. And why we're here is that our systems of higher education, while it meets the needs of many, does not meet the needs of a lot of people. So there are 6.8 million people of working age in California who do not have a degree of any kind, and their career options are limited. So if we can remember that that's who we're doing this work for, is to bring education to the student, to meet that student where they are, then that helps you go through all of the challenging places, because you're going to have situations where you will ask questions and there's no answer. We just don't know. We know that the investment in this is heavy up front. We are learning that the most logical investment to make is when you have multiple programs, because those changes you're making to your system to support that CBE cohort, let's leverage that and let's support additional students in a different program. So those are some other considerations to make. But and again, we start all our meetings with, why are we doing this? It's for the students. And if you keep that front and center, you're more likely to be successful. And I will hand it over to Randy to talk about their program. Again, very different.
Very different, but so much of what Erin has just said applies in that holistic, in that 30,000 foot perspective, because we have also had to have very challenging conversations where you've got great minds in a room, Zoom room in a real room, looking at each other going, how are we going to do this? My favorite emoji on my iPhone is this one. I don't know how we're going to do it, but we're here because we believe in this. We believe that the infrastructure or the fundamental principles behind direct assessment, they mean something to people who have lived their lives working, raising families. They've lived their lives doing things. And for us to turn around and say, we honor and respect that, and we're going to build a program around that, I think that speaks a lot to the mission of the community colleges in California for sure, but all the colleges and any institution whose goal is to empower students. So I think while we will have different approaches, we do, there are these similarities that Aaron's emphasized that just are so important. And also that reliance on the credit hour cannot be stated. There are parts of your college you have no idea are tied to the credit hour, and you will discover them as you go through this journey with us. So yes, let's talk about Southwestern for a few minutes, but the same motivations that brought Coastline and other colleges, we're really looking at a large number of California residents who want to come to college. 5.1 million adults. This is from some of the latest data we had working with the collaborative. You can see in the regions. Way down at the bottom, you see San Diego, 15%, but Imperial, 46% right next to us. We're looking at a regional perspective when we're talking about building competency-based education, designing this approach, and how it can then be scaled up and out to serve students both in our service area and outside of our service area. If we could, please, Aaron, go to the next. Great. So we are doing automotive technology. It is also a career ed program, career technical education program as Coastline's program. Our hands get a little grimier though. We get a little dirtier in this one. And I say it that way because our program has to take into account some face-to-face assessment, some face-to-face interaction, whereas some, or maybe more traditionally, CBE programs or direct assessment usually are fully online, fully via distance ed. But there's really no way around it right now with current technology, although there are opportunities in the future with virtual reality and other software technology where we may be able to move this program fully online. But for now, we're looking at a student profile of someone who is challenged with coming to school on that more traditional 18 to 24-year-old schedule, right out of high school, or they have very few commitments or encumbrances. But in this particular example, you see Annie. She has been married for a while. She's 35 to 40 years old. Two girls, ages 7 and 10. I'm sorry, with a 7 and a 10-year-old, you're not going to make it to an 8 o'clock class, no matter how much you want it. You're just not. So we're really looking at who is the student we're serving and how can we design a program around them, making our college ready for students as opposed to wondering why our students aren't college ready. And I say that purposely because that should remind you of Guided Pathways work, making our colleges and our institutions ready for students as opposed to the other way around. So our students come to us with a lot of things on their mind and a lot of challenges to their consistent engagement with their education. So we want a program that is going to, as much as possible, be as flexible for them. Again, I mentioned very hands-on. Our program, something different from Coastline and others, we will have an automotive technology laboratory. It will be open on the weekends. It will be open at night. And so we have to design a faculty model, both in terms of instruction and compensation, that's going to meet that student where they need us to be, as opposed to having a lab that's open 9 to 5 and if you can't get here, that's too bad. That's certainly not the principles we want to work with. Aaron, if you could, please go to the next. So how is this going to work? Boy, have I heard that question a lot. As Aaron mentioned, students enroll in the program, not in courses. And just that hurdle alone has taken some of our faculty and administrators and others a bit of head scratching. What do you mean they don't enroll in courses? Well, they don't, because there are no courses. Now, our program is designed to where it looks a little bit like courses. So that makes it a little easier to communicate this to our faculty. And then hopefully when we begin working with students, it'll make it a little easier. But again, you're enrolled in the program and you can think of a Canvas site that is pretty big, but there are ways to manage that. So the competency statements are equated to units based on the expected learning time. Some of this is a reiteration of some of the things Aaron's already told us. And we do crosswalk those competencies from our program over to our credit-bearing courses. The way we wrote our competency statements for automotive technology and then for the general ed was to look at existing course, the way we wrote the competencies for auto tech was to look at our current courses and then work backward from those to determine, well, what exactly are those skills? It's very much the way we talk about student learning outcomes sometimes, but we had to do it backward from existing curriculum. And that made it a lot easier to make the equivalence between the competencies and the credit hours that those courses represent. One of the reasons we do that is because you need those credit hour calculations to validate your financial aid distribution, to validate your satisfactory academic progress. All of these things are factors when you're going to offer your program using financial aid, so students can. You don't have to. If you can receive approval and you have a situation where your students don't need financial aid, you may be able to create some kind of competency-based or a direct assessment program. But the reality for so many of our students is that financial aid is critical to access. Students demonstrate through formative and summative assessments. And those formative assessments, you'll see in the parentheses, the word teaching. In competency-based and direct assessment, formative assessments are teaching tools. They're not busy work. They're not things that students do and then they just kind of fall along the wayside. These are opportunities that you must follow up on to provide the feedback students need if they're not showing the progress they should be showing to reach that or to perform that summative assessment and to do well on that summative assessment. So formative assessments are tools for teaching and not anything that's throwaway or insignificant. Credit for your CBE modules or your CBE competencies in the California model must have that equivalent to the credit hour for your transcript. We are required in California to create a CBE transcript that shows what the student would have earned in terms of courses had they taken the traditional program. That's for transfer purposes. It's for communicating the value of the student's degree to institutions that may not be bought into competency-based and direct assessment yet. And there's still plenty of institutions that may be skeptical of what we're attempting to build or want to serve for our students. That transcript, of course, would capture the student's demonstrated mastery of competencies. In California, the competency levels are established in regulation. If a student scores or achieves 80% of the competency statement, or they're performed in a way that the faculty assesses at 80% of the assessment, then they are documented, they are given the grade, I'll put that in air quotes, of mastery. The regulations allow for mastery with distinction, which is 90%. And you have some flexibility in terms of how you define that. But again, it's pretty clear, 80, 90%, you're not going to deviate far from that. And if you begin a CBE approach at your school, this is one of the elements you'll have to do. You'll have to define your levels of achievement, your mastery levels. You'll have to develop rubrics so that those levels can be applied evenly across the spectrum of all your students. And you may need to exceed what our regulations or your regulations or whatever you develop based on your curriculum. We always joke in automotive technology, you can have a mastery at 80%, a mastery with distinction at 90, but I don't know about you, but I would like all 4 lug nuts on my wheel. So I need something higher than 90%. I need 100%. And so we've created mastery with superior distinction, which is awesome. And I want to get it on a t-shirt that says that. But that's the uniqueness of our programs. We needed to do that so we could demonstrate to our students and to others what the value of this work is. And then finally, last line here, we have developed academic terms that fit with CBE and with direct assessment a little bit better than what our traditional terms would be. And if we had another half an hour, we could go through the different types of terms that the Department of Ed recognizes: standard terms, non-terms, non-standard terms, subscription models. That is something that you need to determine how flexible you'll need to be. Aaron mentioned Coastline having, I believe you said 9 start dates. Right now, Southwestern is really only looking at 3. We're still staying kind of close to that traditional calendar with some deviations, primarily because our technology can only support so much. And that's a limitation that we hope to work through as we evolve in our program. Erin, if you could, please jump to the next. Okay. So here you're getting maybe a look under the hood. Haha, you were waiting for that. A look under the hood at our competencies in our automotive technology program. Our competencies for automotive tech are based on the Automotive Services Excellence Industry Standard and the manual that's produced by that organization, as similar to what Erin pointed out with their business degree, their management degree. And we use that curriculum interrogation process. We started calling it that because we were taking our existing curriculum and really taking it apart brick by brick to make sure, I should have said part by part, take it apart part by part so we could really understand what it was that this curriculum was intended to teach so that we could write the competency statements to reflect that, that rigor and that breadth of the discipline. We then grouped these competencies into CBE modules. And you may be thinking, if in your learning management system, if you use Canvas or any others, maybe that word module means something to you. But what we're talking about is a grouping together of competency statements because the formative assessment work, the instruction work, is going to support a summative assessment performance in that general area. And I'll show you the list of automotive tech competency modules in just a moment. And one thing we did have to create, like Erin and Coastline did, we had to create a new course. We've had to create an automotive safety course because what we learned was that there was a component of automotive safety in every one of the 14 automotive technology courses. Well, that makes sense if these courses are not prerequisites of each other, that whenever a student enters into the automotive tech environment, we need to ensure that they'll be safe and we need to ensure that they know how their way around the shop. But what that turned out for us was a benefit because now we can have that assessment, we can have that instruction at the very beginning of the program, and now the student doesn't have to do it 13 more times. They do it once, they're tested and assessed on it, and now we know that they'll have the skills they need to move through the other automotive tech modules. Jumping over to the right side of your column, general ed. As I mentioned at the very beginning, we're still building associate degrees. And so the general education curriculum is required. And in California, we're at a very interesting time because general education is changing dramatically. We just had regulatory changes that redefined all of our general education areas. And that has been happening at right at the time we're building this. So we're still making some adjustments, but what you see on the right is the philosophy behind how we approached general education. We have created modules in our program for each of the general education areas that are defined in the regulations. Now, in those regulations, they provide some broad sense of what those mean, but that's not enough to write competency statements that we can then assess our students on. So we had to go deeper. We did that by bringing together groups of faculty. This was a very faculty-driven, faculty-centric, discipline-centric process. And then we looked at other sources of information that could help us come to some kind of consensus on what it means to be educated in these different general education areas. And we looked very closely at our institutional student learning outcomes. We looked at the student learning outcomes for the automotive tech program, as well as student learning outcomes in the courses that we associated with general education. We also, for sake of validity with our transfer partners, looked at the institutional student learning outcomes for the UC and the University of California and the California State University systems. And then we crosswalked that to the degree qualifications profile, which now in its third iteration attempts to provide some standardization of competency at the associate degree level, the baccalaureate and the master's degree level. All of those crosswalking, all of those outcome statements, all of those elements, including the Title V descriptions, you can imagine a spreadsheet a mile long, brought us to a place where we could write some statements that we felt were valid in the eyes of other educators, could be validated in the eyes of employers, and certainly could be validated in the eyes of other institutions. So we really needed to keep in mind the transferability of our GE curriculum. Now, we will take those GE competency statements, we will develop instruction around them, and we're going to contextualize our assessments and instruction in a way that'll speak to the automotive technology student. And that's when we go back to that student profile. making sure that we know who our students are in automotive tech. And in the work we've done already with our gen ed faculty, working with our auto tech faculty, they're very excited to do this because they're developing assessments that they know are going to hit home for many of our students based on their discipline. Faculty have enjoyed doing that work, which shocked me. Quite honestly, I was like, I'm not sure if they're going to like it, but they love it. And they really like the idea of creating contextualized assessments and instruction. And again, we mentioned crosswalks and so on. Down there in red at the bottom, you see that we have 500 competencies. That's a rough estimate, give or take 10, 5, 10. But that's because the automotive service excellence standards are so precise that we must meet those in order to maintain our certification with ASC. And then across the 20 modules, those 20 modules, which include the gen ed statements, we're looking at average 4 to 8 gen ed statements for each of those gen ed areas. If we could go to the next, please, Karen. Looking at our time, I need to speed up. This is our list. I won't spend too much time here. It's hard to read anyway. But you can see that it kind of looks like classes in a sense, but when you get into the instruction is very move at your own pace, very focused on helping students get ready for those assessments, even in those gen ed areas as we build those modules. Aaron, if you could, please go to that. This slide, I think this might be one of our last slides. This is just to give you an idea of scope. As we've said throughout this presentation, all hands are on deck for this. We are talking to people at our college. I've worked at my college for 25 years. I'm meeting people I've never met who've also worked there for 25 years because we have to bring all of these things together. We have to bring all of these components together to make sure they're all working together in synchronicity with the CBE model, the CBE approach, the CBE goals. Everywhere from finance to technology to your communications and financial aid. It's such an undertaking. We're 2.5, almost 3 years, almost finished with year 3, and we're still building the bus as we're driving it, as they say. Another automotive tech analogy, hopefully. So I think with that, one last one. And I think this is kind of a reiteration. We've talked about some of these as we go, but I don't think we've mentioned faculty workload and selection. You may be thinking, how am I going to get my union on board? That's a great question. And it's not because the union is inherently opposed to doing something like this, your faculty unions or your classified professional unions either, because there's work for everyone in the CBE approach. But really because it's so different and throws the credit hour out the window in terms of how we base faculty compensation, time on task, all of these elements that we really have to start from scratch in some of these respects. And if we could, Aaron, the next. This is us. You are welcome to reach out to anybody you see on this list as the lead face for this. You can always start with me. You see my name at the top, and we're happy to answer any questions specifically about Southwestern and how we're doing any element that you've thought about as we've given this presentation. Aaron?
And I'm sharing our key contacts at Coastline as well, and a couple of resources. So I was in another session that was talking about competency-based education, and it cited the first book on that list, and it's really the go-to starting point for you. If you're interested in implementing a CBE program, it talks you through how to do it. This CBEN organization has also developed a rubric for how you would assess your program. So that's why they are on the list. I personally was totally inspired by reading Paul LeBlanc's book. And he's UMass Global president who brought the direct assessment modality to his college because he was inspired by students. And then the Chancellor's office has a wide variety of resources as well. So I misspoke, Randy, because the last 2 slides are for our accessibility. We've got cleaner versions of some of the diagram slides that are hard to make accessible. So this is our last slide, and we are happy to answer any questions you may have. I hadn't seen any questions in the chat, but I feel like we've been talking at you for quite a while. So happy to answer questions. And I'm happy to also stop the recording if it would make you more comfortable to ask a question.